Hi, Catherine here from Yoga Nebraska. I am here to tell you a little bit about my PMDD story. So if you've never heard of PMDD, it stands for Premenstrual Dysphoric Disorder. And this is a hormone-based mood disorder that happens sort of cyclically throughout your life. And it can be really, really debilitating and can have really deep impacts on pretty much every aspect of your life. Generally, someone with PMDD will feel absolutely terrible for 1 to 2 weeks ahead of their period. And as they menstruate, they'll start to feel those symptoms waning a little bit, and then they'll have a short period of 1 to 2 weeks where they'll feel generally normal, but probably exhausted from all of the emotional, mental, and physical chaos that comes with a PMDD diagnosis. If you're not sure what PMDD is, check out my previous episode. I'll have it linked in the description as well. It'll explain a little bit more about what PMDD is and a little bit about the symptoms and how diagnosis happens. So although 1 in 20 menstruators actually deal with PMDD, it's not really well known, well researched, or well understood by the general community and the medical community in particular. So to give you an idea of how much PMDD can really affect someone's life, I'll tell you a little bit about my own personal story with PMDD. And you can see if this sounds familiar to you or sounds like anybody you know. So personally, I have always dealt with anxiety since I was a young child. Not that anybody around me knew that's what I was dealing with, but I would find that I would always sort of have a tummy ache if I was doing something important, like if I had a test or we were going on a field trip or I was at swimming lessons or a sleepover. I would just start to feel very anxious and have some physical symptoms. But as I got older and started high school, my anxiety was getting worse and worse. I was isolating myself from my friends and family. I started to experience bouts of depression, and I would just generally feel very overwhelmed, out of control, sad, anxious, just generally not myself. My family sort of chalked this up as normal teenage angst, but as time went on and I was having more and more difficulties with my home life, at school, and at work, as well as like my relationships with my friends and extended family, it became pretty clear that I was having some pretty real mental health struggles. Everything was suddenly becoming more difficult, from handing in assignments at school, to meeting deadlines, to being able to hold it together at my part-time job, and just being able to have the energy to hang out with friends after school. Everything was just becoming really, really hard and unmanageable. For the most part, I'd be able to hold it together at work and school, but by the time I got home, I just couldn't hold in my emotions anymore, and I would just fall apart, and we would get into these big fights, and I would be crying, and it just really wasn't a good time in my life. I wasn't properly diagnosed with PMDD until at least 6 years after I started menstruating, which was the time that my PMDD actually started. But believe it or not, this 6-year delay in diagnosis is actually pretty good, because the average is about 12 years and 3 different doctors to get diagnosed. I did have to see 3 different doctors for my diagnosis, which is horrible. But I did manage to get my diagnosis in about half the time. The way I got diagnosed was that my mom and I finally realized that my episodes of extreme anxiety and depression were related to my period. I would always seem to find myself feeling very overwhelmed and out of control, and then all of a sudden I would start bleeding, and within a couple days it would sort of ease and I'd be feeling a little bit better. We mentioned this to my doctor, who sent me with some printable sheets to fill in, and after a couple months I started noticing that all of these symptoms were lining up with my menstrual cycle, and when I went back to her, she diagnosed me with premenstrual dysphoric disorder. All she had to give me was a sort of little printout sheet from somewhere on the internet with pretty much the basics of what PMDD was. And this was before it was a really common diagnosis. It wasn't included in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is what psychiatrists use to diagnose. It wasn't included until 2013, and it wasn't included in the World Health Organization's manual until 2019. Sorry, I'm going to have to read the title for this one because it's long and I can't remember it. The International Statistical Classification of Diseases and Related Health Problems, and this is the 11th edition. So I was diagnosed prior to both of these, so it's actually shocking that my doctor even knew that premenstrual dysphoric disorder was a thing. And I'm really grateful that she did, because I didn't know what I was dealing with. Over the next 15 years, I tried many, many treatments. The unfortunate thing with PMDD is there is no specific targeted treatment for it. Basically, first-line treatments are diet and lifestyle changes and exercise. Second-line treatments are either birth control or antidepressants. And then third is surgical or chemical menopause, which can include the complete removal of most of your reproductive organs. I won't go too much into my own personal treatment because having been in this community for a long time, I know that what works for one person might not work for another person. And I'm not a medical professional, so I feel like I should not be recommending a specific treatment to anyone. But just know that I have really been through the ringer with this, and I've tried just so many things, and it's been very, very frustrating. People with PMDD tend to have to be sort of guinea pigs in this sort of trial and error experiment of finding what works out for our own unique bodies. So personally, I have spent thousands and thousands of dollars and lots of time on different supplements, vitamins, probably 5 or 6 different types of birth control, 5 or 6 different types of antidepressants. And I have not yet tried surgical or chemical menopause, and that's because I haven't decided if I would like to have kids yet. So it can be really difficult for someone who is a young person like me to have to figure out how this is going to impact their future decisions. So I won't talk too much about treatments, but I will leave a link below to the International Association for Premenstrual Disorders, or the IAPMD, which is a great trusted nonprofit resource for those with premenstrual dysphoric disorder and premenstrual exacerbation. And they have a great evidence-based, peer-reviewed list of treatment options for you. So I will leave that in the link below. Please do check that out. On my own treatment journey, I have seen family doctors, gynecologists, therapists, hypnotherapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, any number of medical professionals, and it's been really, really hard to find ones that know what they're talking about and are educated specifically about PMDD. There is a big gap in research about PMDD, and personally, I think that this is because women's bodies, or I should say female bodies, there are people that don't identify as women that do menstruate, so I want to make sure that I include these people as well. Bodies that menstruate are not well studied, and that's because they take longer for medical studies because they have to take these cyclical hormones into account. This is known as gender bias, and there's some really great books and articles about this topic that I will link in the blog that goes along with this little video. I'll put that in the description as well if you're interested in learning about it. It's a really big deal, and it means that these types of conditions are really under-researched and underfunded. So this lack of research trickles down into our medical community, meaning that doctors are really not well educated on this either. The biggest thing for my whole PMDD journey has been realizing that I need to be my own best advocate, and I need to be very educated on PMDD because there's a good chance that I actually know more about my condition than the doctors who I am seeing. I have a lived experience. I have 15 years of knowing what PMDD feels like in my own body, and I keep up to date on the latest medical journals and anything that comes out, latest medical trials, anything that comes out on this condition and how it could affect me potentially. Personally, I want to help other people with PMDD learn to advocate for themselves and to really know what their needs are. And to ask for those, and to not be afraid to leave their doctor or ask for a second opinion, because it's your life and you can't afford to be gambling with it. If you've been struggling to get a diagnosis or to find proper treatment, the best thing to do is to go to the IAPMD website and print out the patient information sheets and the provider or doctor information sheets, and to bring them with you to your appointment so that you can talk to your doctor about evidence-based and peer-reviewed suggestions for treatment. I've mentioned them a couple times now, but I really do love the IAPMD. They're a nonprofit organization that supports people with premenstrual dysphoric disorder and premenstrual exacerbation, and they actually provide training to different physicians about PMDD because they realize that there's this big gap in educating doctors. A personal pet peeve about PMDD is not only the pharmaceutical industry and research, not only the medical community and doctors, but also the wellness sort of influencer community. So I find that there's lots of dietitians, naturopaths, self-appointed period experts out there on Instagram and Facebook and the like that are purporting to be able to cure PMDD and saying that it's all chalked up to a hormone imbalance, which it is not. PMDD will not show up on a saliva test, blood work, or anything like that. So if someone is telling you that they can treat your PMDD by balancing your hormones, please do not fall for that. That is a scam. I've been scammed before, and it's not pleasant. It's just people trying to make money off of those who are suffering. There is a big culture of pill shaming or med shaming in the wellness industry, where natural treatments are purported to be better, where they may be sometimes, but with a mental illness and reproductive illness as severe as PMDD, I feel like sometimes medication may be warranted depending on the person's unique experience. So personally, as someone who is part of the wellness space as a yoga instructor and who's also online, I want to tackle this problem head on. Although I'm part of this industry, I want to make it really clear that as a yoga teacher, I don't believe yoga is going to cure PMDD or anything like that. It technically would be a first-line treatment as a lifestyle option, but I see PMDD as something that can help you cope with the symptoms, not necessarily treat them. And for me, yoga has been something that's really helped me to have a little bit more self-compassion and self-respect for myself, and cultivate a sense of resilience and empowerment in moving through my own journey. So although I don't think that yoga is going to cure your PMDD, I think it can be invaluable in helping you on your own journey. So in the next episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how PMDD has affected the three main areas of my life more specifically, so including my home life, my work and school experience, and my relationships with others, plus one other factor that I think does not get enough attention, which is self-esteem, which I just mentioned there. So I will give you a couple of ideas of how I cope with my PMDD personally, and next episode we'll talk a bit more about how deeply it's affected my life. So as I mentioned, the number one thing that I've learned about living with PMDD is educating myself and the importance of being well educated about what PMDD is, how it affects my life, and what are the most scientifically proven treatments to work. If you check out the blog post that is accompanying this video, you'll also be able to find lots of links to places where I can find trusted information about PMDD, and I suggest that you check those out as well. Number two, as I mentioned, is being really persistent with my medical team and kind of not taking anybody's crap. So I have seen a lot of doctors. My most recent doctor wouldn't even refer to PMDD as a illness. He would just call it like premenstrual symptoms, which I was not happy with because I feel like PMDD is a life-altering, debilitating disorder, and I wanted him to take it seriously, and I didn't feel like he was. So I left his practice and I've been looking for other doctors, and he sent me to a gynecologist who I also felt like was very undereducated about my condition, and I took it upon myself to find a new one who I'm working with now. So this number two thing sort of goes with what I said previously, is be educated and learn to advocate for yourself and to put your lived experience and the consequences of you living with PMDD above the opinion of perhaps just one medical professional. As is the case with many people with chronic illnesses, your lived experience with PMDD and the consequences of you continuing to live with this condition are really important, and often we dedicate our lives to learning more about our condition and how to best treat it. Whereas your medical professional might just have had a portion of one small lecture in their medical schooling specifically on this one disorder. So you want to look for a medical professional that keeps up to date on the latest studies and updates to the DSM. Once I learned that I needed to be my own best advocate, I felt empowered to ask for second opinions and even fire my doctors if I felt that they were undereducated or even if they just had bad bedside manner. And this is because I know myself, I know my experience, and I know that I deserve the best treatment. Which brings us to number three, which is being resilient and open to new treatments. So like I mentioned, having PMDD basically means just a lot of trial and error with treatments, which sucks, and we deserve a targeted treatment, which is in the works, but it's taking a very long time. So sometimes it can be really hard when you get your hopes up for a new treatment only to deal with terrible side effects or it not working properly, or in fact some of the treatments tend to make people with PMDD feel worse. Sometimes worse before they feel better, or just sometimes straight up worse. So it can be really, really frustrating when you're already going up on these highs and lows of mood and pain and just the general roller coaster that is PMDD. But then you're also having to go through these emotional ups and downs of having really high hopes that the next treatment is going to be the one that fixes you and makes you feel better, only to feel much, much worse after trying. And it can be hard to pick yourself up, especially when you're feeling crappy, to make appointments with new doctors, to get referrals, to be making phone calls to schedule appointments, taking time off work to get to appointments, trying different medications, having horrible side effects, going to a new therapist, having to explain your whole story, finding another therapist. It can just be a seemingly never-ending trail of drudgery. But I found a great therapist. So as my great therapist has reminded me, one of the greatest strengths that PMDD has given me is my perseverance and resilience. So although it's hard to get up and keep trying, it's pretty much your only option when you have PMDD. And you just need to see that is the beautiful thing about you, is that although you have so much adversity, you keep trying. And eventually something is bound to stick. And finally, my fourth method of coping with PMDD has been yoga and meditation. So again, I don't view this as a treatment per se, but a coping mechanism. So the thing that yoga has helped me with the most is feeling compassion for myself and realizing that I've been on a really difficult journey and that I deserve to give myself the compassion that is so sorely needed. It can be really easy to blame yourself and to feel like a failure for not being able to cope with this thing that most other menstruators can cope with, and to struggle with your relationships and work and school and pretty much every area of life. Yoga has been so helpful in just making me feel more calm and at peace throughout this whole horrible PMDD storm. Meditation helps me to feel more calm and centered, and the yoga practices help me to take care of my body, especially when it is in pain. So that's all I have for you today. Next week, I'll be talking a little bit more about the 3 main ways PMDD affects your life, including that one extra unconsidered factor that I think should be in there. So we'll be discussing that next week. Stay tuned for more of that. You can also join my newsletter. I'll be sharing some resources about PMDD and how to cope best with PMDD, lots of other resources, including a free resource library of where to find great information, as well as support groups and must-follows online. I also have my own support group on Facebook. I'll leave the link for that below as well. And over the next few weeks, I will have 4 mini yoga classes to help support you in each phase of the menstrual cycle, so be sure to stay tuned for that and join my mailing list so you can get those sent straight to your inbox when they're ready. Again, if you identified with anything that I've said in this video, please let me know in the comments. Let me know how you are doing and how I can best support you. And if this sounds like anyone else you know, please share widely, because as I mentioned, PMDD goes undiagnosed and misdiagnosed quite often, and it's really important that we raise awareness about it. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.